Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. So I want to start off today's episode with a story. So I was talking to a guy friend recently at both of our sons' ultimate Frisbee tournament. And by the end of this conversation, we both had decided that I must make an episode about it, because this issue that we were talking about simply does not get addressed nearly enough in relationship improving advice. And in fact, it might be hard for some to hear, but that is exactly why it's so important to hear, because to improve a relationship, to feel so much happier in our marriages and our lives, sometimes we absolutely need to take a hard but loving look at ourselves so we can make the changes we want. I know that without having done that many, many times in my own life and marriage, there's absolutely no way I would have the amazing, loving marriage that I have. And because you're listening, you probably already know that that's part of what I'm here to help you do. So let's do it together. So I was talking to my friend at this Ultimate Frisbee tournament. And by the way, if you don't know Ultimate and you have a kid in the middle school / high school range, Ultimate Frisbee is the best sport because it's very much about cooperation and instead of intense rivalry with the other teams, it's cultivates kinship and cooperation and consideration and just all these values that we HSPs tend to really like. But that's a side note. So my friend and I, both of our boys are seniors in high school, and they've both had a serious girlfriend for a while now. Wait, I should say serious girlfriends because it's not the same girl. And of course, that's true for several of the other boys on their team as well. And two of these other boys were leaving early from this long 2-day tournament and missing a couple of the games and driving 3 hours home to go to prom with their girlfriend. This was a prom at a different school than the boys were going to. And then they're waking up very early the next morning and driving 3 hours back to play the last 3 games. Now, my friend and I had a good laugh over how sweet that is and also how powerful a girlfriend's desires can be, that these boys would go to such lengths to go to the prom for their girls. And since my friend himself has been in the partner search for several years now, we've had conversations about the challenges that he's run into in his dating life. And some of that was really related to what we were both seeing in that moment in our teenagers' lives. So I felt like it was a good moment to share how, although the boys going to these lengths to please their girlfriends is truly very sweet, I've also been seeing a related pattern a lot that has actually concerned me. And that is the sweet boy or man giving up what matters to him, what really matters to him, because his girlfriend or his partner, his loved one, is telling him to. Because she gets mad at him when he doesn't do what she wants, so he acquiesces. So I've seen this over and over in the younger, sort of teen, young 20s generation. And I also see this in my clients' relationships. Certainly not all the time, but this is certainly a dynamic that happens. And it's been especially obvious with my sons and my son's friends because I see them all the time, right? And he does this because he wants to make her happy, right? He gives up the thing he wants, like to be there for his team in this example, and hours of time in the car and such in order to make her happy, right? But underneath that giving the thing up or doing the thing for her, and it looks very sweet on the surface, what can and often is happening, is that he feels controlled. And again, like he has to give up what matters to him over and over so that she can be happy. And what eventually happens is that he can't take it anymore. So my oldest son broke up with his girlfriend after many months of this. And my middle son has seen some of this going on, felt some of this pattern growing in his relationship. And he's also told me that he's frustrated for his friends who are feeling and dealing with the same thing. It's like their girlfriend thinks that they are the boss. And if the boy doesn't, say, cut his hair the way she likes, or write her enough love letters, or if he falls asleep after a super long day before he calls her or texts her, well, then he should be afraid of her wrath. And so the boys stop feeling like they are loved for themselves. They start feeling like they have to perform for love or give up part of themselves. So as I shared this pattern that I've seen to my friend, his eyes lit up wide in recognition, and he wholeheartedly agreed that he sees this with the boys and has seen it a lot in himself. And he was so glad that I, as a relationship coach who, puts out my teachings into the world, was catching this and saying something about it. Because we both agreed that this is bigger than our boys or his relationships, my friend's relationships, right? This is a pattern that we both see very much in the teen relationships, but he's also seen it very much in his relationships as a man in his 40s. And so this is bigger than just those two places. This is really a cultural issue. Many, many women subtly feel that their boyfriend or their partner is supposed to do their bidding. And if he isn't doing it right naturally, then it's her job to get him to, often by expressing anger at him. But sometimes, there's other ways that this can come out. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. But in other words, and to not mince words, many of us women have become quite controlling in our intimate relationships. And it's a major obstacle to having the kind of relationship we really want deep down. Now, I will be the first to admit that this has been an issue for me. This has been where some of my biggest growth is, and certainly has been my biggest challenge in relationships, falling into a controlling approach to relationships. And I think it's really important to be able to see it and own it and not make ourselves bad because of it. So we're going to talk about that as we move forward with this episode. But before I go further, I do want to say a couple things here. I have made another series of episodes on control quite a while ago in the podcast. So there's 3 episodes. They're in the low 60s of this podcast. But I wanted to revisit this topic today because it's so important and so sneaky and so pervasive. And oftentimes we don't even realize it's happening or we're doing it. And I want to talk about where it comes from through the lens of what I know now versus what I taught back when I made those older episodes. So feel free to go listen to those older episodes after you listen to this one, because everything I said there still goes and it might help kind of round out some of what I'm saying today. But today I want to help even more and make it even more relevant. And the second thing I want to share right now before we dive deeper is I totally get why we women are tending towards this controlling thing. I told my friend that day that as much as it hurts to see our boys be treated like this and to see their little hearts just getting kind of pushed around, I also absolutely understand how easy it is to fall into being controlling and demanding and ultimately kind of manipulative in our relationships with men. And like I just said a minute ago, I've definitely been there. And sometimes even still, I catch myself falling into it. Luckily, I know how to get right back out of it. But the thing is, control is what is being subtly taught from so many directions in our world right now. We turn on the internet and something tells us we deserve to have our husbands and boyfriends give us all the love and support and, well, really everything that we want. And that if he isn't doing that, then we as women are settling. And settling, the message goes, is bad. So what happens is that women tend to feel entitled to get pushy and controlling and try to make their partner be who they want him to be when their man isn't living up to all their expectations or even all the cultural expectations of who he should be. Now, please don't hear this as I don't think men need to grow because that's not it at all. Absolutely, men have some growing just like we do. And in fact, this is why I've even created a little course for your partner called the Supportive Partner Micro Course. And that's only available when you coach one-to-one with me in Sanctuary One-to-One. But on this podcast, I always am talking to you as a woman because you're the only one who can do your own work. You can't do his work, right? Of course, I think this is where control comes in. We get confused about that. And we think we can do his work by controlling. But I also want to say that I genuinely believe that this habit, this tendency to fall into control comes from a good place, right? In that we as women over the last many decades have been finally pushing for what we want in love instead of taking the scraps of whatever is offered. And of course, I want women to have the love we dream of so much. So it's absolutely a good and beautiful thing to be working to have the kind of love and relationship that you want. I think that's actually essential for the health of us as women in general on this planet, but also for the health of the human race. But there's a way to do that really works, and there's a lot of ways to do that really don't work. And control is one of them. Because trying to control another person's behavior, especially the one you're supposedly there to love and support, is truly the opposite of what makes for a real loving relationship. It makes love a job for both of you. So for you, it makes it a job because you have to work to get him to behave in certain ways and do certain things. Like you need to work to get him to say the right things. And that will build resentment in you. And for him, it becomes a job because he has to do what you want while not listening to or honoring his own needs and wants. So he has to constantly be following your rules like he would a boss's or a mother's. In fact, the very first episode I made on control in the podcast is called Being His Lover, Not His Mother. So control tends to suck the relationship dry of love and makes it a duty-bound situation where no one wins. Because even if you do succeed at getting him to do what you want, you've not only had to work hard for it, but it doesn't feel as genuine, right? If you work to get him to write you a love letter, it feels forced, right? And like you told him to. So it really doesn't feel like you wanted it to feel. It doesn't make you feel as loved as you hoped, right? It may help a little bit, but then you're right back wanting more from him. And for him, again, he ends up not being loved for who he is, but rather when he acts like you want him to be, when he acts like the fantasy you have of a good partner, then he gets rewarded with your love. But that doesn't feel like real love or respect or admiration. That feels like a transactional relationship. And that's not actually what any of us want in our real, truly loving relationships, right? So you both lose when control becomes a primary pattern in your relationship. Now, before you decide that this episode is about your son's girlfriend or your daughter-in-law or your friend or some woman on the internet, I want to gently invite you to consider whether some version of this might be showing up in your own relationship too. Not because you're a super controlling person or a bad partner, or that you're doing anything as obvious as some of what I've already talked about. It's just that this pattern can be incredibly subtle. Most of us imagine control looks like someone barking orders or making demands or threats or trying to run another person's life in really overt ways. And sometimes it definitely does. But it can also be incredibly subtle and actually kind of look like it's just caring or helping or loving or trying to have a better relationship. So I'm going to give you some more specific signs of what control might look like and how it might be showing up in your relationship. So just keep your ears open, be open to this, how this might be showing up for you. Because awareness is the first step to making things so much better. So the most subtle forms of control don't look like control on the surface at all. They really do just happen inside our own minds. So that can look like spending a lot of time thinking about what your partner should be doing differently, or frequently wishing he would communicate differently or be more affectionate or be more emotionally available or help more without being asked, or thinking if he really cared, he would know, or I shouldn't have to ask, or thinking, why doesn't he get it? Or keeping score of who's putting more effort into the relationship, or feeling responsible for improving the relationship yourself, or feeling like it's your job to help him become the man he could be, or feeling disappointed because he isn't acting like the partner you imagine he could be, or loving his potential more than the actual person standing in front of you, or feeling anxious when he makes choices that you wouldn't make, or constantly monitoring whether he's putting enough effort into the relationship, or monitoring how connected he seems, or whether things feel okay between the two of you, or replaying conversations and trying to figure out how to get him to understand your perspective, or repeatedly explaining your position because you're hoping he'll eventually agree with you, or assuming that if he truly understood your perspective, he would eventually see things the way you do, or feeling okay only when he's doing what you want and not feeling okay when he's not, or finding that your sense of connection rises and falls largely based on whether he's behaving the way you think he should. So just notice that these aren't really actions. They're thoughts and expectations and stories inside of you. And these oftentimes become the fuel for controlling behaviors. So once thoughts and expectations like those start driving our behavior, control often moves into the relationship itself. So this looks like trying to manage how he feels and communicates and connects or responds to you. So that might, in more detail, that might look like managing the quality of his tone, right? Being like, don't talk to me like that. Can you say, or just say it like this, right? Correcting how he talks to you, not just tone, but also the words he uses, and monitoring whether he's listening well enough, or watching where he's looking while you're talking, or trying to get him to communicate differently, trying to get him to talk about his feelings more openly, trying to get him to have deeper conversation than he naturally wants to have. And I don't mean gently and lovingly asking, would you be willing, right? I mean, the other ways we can kind of try to poke and prod and pressure him to have those, say, deeper conversations. It can also look like spending a lot of energy trying to help him see what he's doing wrong. That's the place that I've typically fallen into. A lot of us do as HSPs. Having a hard time accepting that he genuinely sees things differently than you. Trying to fix his feelings. So this one's sneaky because sometimes it's like, oh, well, I just don't want him to feel bad. So it can mask itself as caring. And sometimes it genuinely is caring, but also fixing his feelings isn't your job. So trying to prevent him from being upset is actually kind of a form of control. Feeling responsible for managing his emotions, feeling responsible for managing the connection between you, right? So sometimes controlling just doesn't look like controlling at all. Sometimes it looks like people pleasing, like trying to make him happy all the time, working hard to prevent his disappointment, managing your own behavior so he feels good about you, trying to make sure he approves of you. These are also control, because at the core, you're still trying to manage another human being's emotional experience. And manage and control really are interchangeable words in this case. Now, of course, sometimes control is more concrete, like really trying to manage what he does. So that can look like redoing things after he does them, like rearranging the dishwasher after he's loaded it, or taking over projects because he's not doing them the way you would. I remember doing this with my ex-husband's business website, for example. It didn't look up to par for me, and so I was like, let me help you. Feeling the need to step in and prevent him from making mistakes or learning things the hard way. Can you see how this is very mother energy? Like we do that for our kids sometimes? Yeah, well, we oftentimes end up doing this in our marriage as well. Another way more concrete control can look is telling him what to wear or how he should groom himself, telling him when he should be home, trying to manage how he parents the kids. That's a big one. And it's a hard one to not do. And I'm not saying you should never ever do any of these things, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. I'm just at the moment pointing out where we do fall into more concrete control sometimes. So other examples are deciding which chores he should prioritize on the weekend from his list, or telling him how he should spend his money, or telling him what he should eat or drink. No beers, no peanut butter cups, right? That's my joke. If you've been listening to the podcast, you'll get that one. Telling him how he should handle his relationship with his mother. Telling him how he should manage his work life or time. And then there's this category of control that we fall into that is kind of like just we're controlling through emotional pressure. So that can look like repeatedly bringing up the same issue, hoping that he'll finally change, or giving him advice that he didn't ask for, or becoming irritated when he doesn't take your advice, or using criticism or complaint to motivate change, or anger to motivate change, or complaining in hopes he'll finally understand and then do things differently. That was a huge approach that I took unconsciously in my first marriage. And we do this with blaming too. We can fall into blaming or guilt tripping or demanding or giving the cold shoulder or withdrawing affection to make a point and get him to change. Or it can look like having emotional reactions that are partly intended to make him understand how much he's hurt you. It can look like more extremely yelling, accusing, trying to make him feel bad enough that he'll change, right? And of course, that it can also be more subtle, like this emotional pressure thing. I remember times when in my first marriage, would go to my bedroom after an interaction with my husband and just cry. And on the surface, I was genuinely hurt, like that was definitely there. But if I got really honest with myself, part of me was hoping my husband would come rushing in and comfort me and reassure me and promise to change. So that was like a manipulation tactic that I wasn't like super aware of. And it wasn't like I was being a bad woman because of that. But I didn't know a better way of influencing the relationship. And I didn't know a better way to help myself feel better in the relationship, right? And that's so often at the very heart of what we're trying to do. Like the reason we fall into any of these control tactics is an attempt, although a misguided attempt, to influence our partner's behavior so that we can feel better. So I'm going to talk about this more in a few minutes. But before we go there, I do want to give you one last category or area that signs of control can be found, and that is in your partner's behavior. So sometimes your partner's behavior can give you clues that a controlling dynamic has developed. And again, not always. And your partner's behavior can also happen for a variety of reasons. But sometimes his behavior can be a sign. So for example, if he frequently says things like, I can never do anything right, or he becomes defensive very quickly, or he stops sharing things openly because he expects criticism from you, or he starts doing things behind your back because it's easier than having another discussion about it, or he automatically asks for your opinion before making decisions he could easily make himself, or he relies on you to manage things he's perfectly capable of handling, like scheduling doctor's appointments or organizing basic life tasks. And I made a whole podcast episode about this dynamic. I think it's called overfunctioning versus underfunctioning or something. But if that one kind of rings a bell, you can go check out that episode too. Or he looks to you to determine whether he's done something correctly, or he stops volunteering his ideas and opinions and preferences because he assumes you'll have the right answer or the answer. Or he becomes passive in decision making and says things like, whatever you want. It is like raining cats and dogs out there right now. I don't know if you can hear that subtle thrum in the background, but that's what it is, rain. So in some relationships, one partner really kind of steps into this role as of the manager, and the other becomes the employee. Or again, one person acts more like the mother and the other more like the child. And I hear that kind of analogy a lot from the women that I work with. And to me, I think it speaks to many things that are going on culturally, biologically, or physiologically in men and women, and the roles we've really stepped into in our intimate relationships. And at the heart, that relationship is one that actually doesn't, it is one that no one wants in a marriage. And control is a big piece of why that dynamic happens. And releasing control is the path to creating a dynamic where you're not mother-child, but lover to lover or partner to partner. So if you recognize yourself in any of these examples, please understand that you are very far from a bad person. And if you fall into any of these, please understand that it's just the way you currently know to try to help yourself feel better by getting your partner to be or do things certain ways. But again, not only does it get exhausting to feel better by trying to get your partner to do and be better, but it is also using him to make you happier. And that's not what another person's life is for. Nor is it a good way to love another human being. So again, I know that this can be hard to hear, but it is also very human, especially at this sort of societal moment. I certainly can think of times in my own marriage when I wasn't fully loving my husband for who he was. I was loving the version of him I wished he could become. Right? The version who communicated differently, who understood me better, who said the right things more often, who responded exactly how I wanted him to so that I could feel good. And when I look back, I really do see that underneath all of that was fear, not bad intent, was hurt and wanting to feel loved, right? Not bad intent. And simply not knowing a better way to get there, to feel safe, to feel loved. So I want to go deeper into that right now. But before I do, I'm just going to be really clear about this. I am not saying that you should not have wants or needs or desires or ask for things. Of course, you should do all of that. And this is by no means to say that you should be fiercely independent and never need anything from your spouse and let him do anything ever. No, that's not what I'm saying. I just mean that control and all its little small siblings are not conducive to getting what you most want. A relationship that naturally is mutually supportive, truly deeply connected and intimate and light and loving and emotionally secure. But there is for sure a way to create all of that in your marriage. And that is, of course, what I do with women, help them create all of that. So this episode isn't about every step of how to create all that, but it is about a very important piece. Stopping one of the biggest things that prevents you from having all of that. And that, of course, is control. So let's go deeper into the question that really matters so much, which is, why do good, loving women become controlling in the first place? Because for sure, most of us aren't just trying to control our partner for fun or to prop up our ego. What we're really trying to do, if you haven't picked this up already from what I've said, is that we're trying to control how we ourselves feel by controlling what he does. And this impulse to control comes from fear and also the lack of skill to feel how you want to feel from within. So let's break both of those down. And we could call these the two roots of control. So the first root is our tendency to outsource or delegate our emotions. So when we want to feel loved or adored or important or just worthy and okay, we essentially have two pathways. One is external. We can look to another person to show us that we are loved, important, worthy through their words or their attention or their actions or their consistency. And that's what most of us do because that's what we've been taught. And I do have a whole episode where I go pretty deep on this, and that is episode 192, Emotional Delegation. And I review that in a little less detail, but also it's a great episode to learn more about this. And that's just a couple episodes back, called Emotional Agency 101. That's episode 213. But really, it's just that we look to our partner, sometimes other people, but oftentimes it falls on our partner to give us proof that we are loved, we are important, we are safe, and that we matter, and really other feelings as well. So that's kind of the first pathway, and that's the less reliable and much more problematic pathway. That's the pathway that tends to lead us to trying to control the other person so that we can control our feelings. Now, the other pathway to being able to feel all of those feelings that we want is internal, right? We can develop a sense of all of those feelings from within ourselves that is steady enough that we don't need external confirmation to feel them. Rather, we have the skill to support ourselves to feel those ways. It's not that we don't take in the external confirmation of all of that as well when it's given. We just don't have to rely on the external, and therefore we don't have to control the external and cause all those problems that comes from controlling. And what's so interesting and kind of magic about this is the more solid that internal ability to support and guide our feelings becomes, the more we sort of can rest in those feelings from within ourselves, the more we naturally tend to experience those external ones as well. Because we don't have to demand it or chase it, we tend to naturally invite it from our partner. But the reverse is also true. The more we depend on another person to generate those feelings inside us, the more pressure we put on them, consciously or unconsciously, to behave in ways that make us feel okay. And over time, that pressure really does feel like control, and it doesn't feel loving. And it's not because we're trying to dominate someone, it's because we're trying to stabilize something in ourselves through their behavior, because we don't yet know a better way. Right? Most of us were never taught how to reliably meet our own emotional needs from within. So of course we default to delegating them or outsourcing that job to our partner. And then we have to take on the job of making sure our partner does the things that creates those feelings in us, or so we think unconsciously. So it just doesn't work very well. The second root of control is fear. Fears that so many of us just innately have because of certain things, perhaps in our physiology, in our biology, in our inheritance, our cultural and biological inheritance, and our early years of living, that led to fears of not being enough, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of disconnection, fear of losing love or losing our relationship. And so at its core, control is often what happens when fear gets activated in us inside our relationship. Because when we're afraid, our nervous system looks for ways to create safety. And one of the most immediate strategies it reaches for is getting that partner of ours to act differently so we can feel better, so we can not be so afraid of all those things that I just mentioned. So we start trying to guide and correct and shape our partner's behavior to relieve that internal feeling of threat. So control is in many ways just a very human way to attempt to create safety. The issue is that although it temporarily might reduce anxiety, it absolutely gradually erodes the very thing that you're trying to protect, which is connection and love and feeling truly safe and good in the relationship. Because a relationship can't stay open and warm and alive and loving and sweet and safe when one person is trying to subtly manage the other person in order to feel okay inside of themselves. So at this point, you might be thinking, all right, I see it. I can recognize some of these patterns in myself. I can see the fear that might be living there. I can see how trying to get my partner to behave in a certain way isn't helping. Yeah. So that's amazing if you're recognizing that in yourself. I actually truly celebrate you because, like I said, awareness and being able to see these things and own these things in ourselves are so important and so essential to make positive changes. And what I've found after years of coaching women, and honestly from my own experience too, is that understanding and seeing something doesn't automatically change it. Yeah? Right? I think that's where a lot of therapy falls short. They look for the why and they look for the pattern and they leave it at that. But that doesn't change it. And most women who struggle with these patterns aren't doing them because they don't know that they shouldn't, right? In other words, most women know that trying to control their partner isn't a great strategy. And most already know that their fears aren't really rational. And many women have read books and listened to podcasts and watched all the videos and gained a lot of insight, but they still keep falling into the pattern of control, however big or little that is. And it still keeps eroding the relationship and how good they feel in it. So the problem isn't a lack of awareness. The problem is that awareness by itself doesn't stop the pattern, because the pattern is happening at levels that are deeper than conscious understanding. So it's happening at the nervous system level, it's happening at the level of the mind, and it's happening at the level of self-worth and identity. And unless we address these 3 deeper roots, we'll be able to understand the problem perfectly and still find ourselves repeating it tomorrow and the next day and the day after, which is why so many women end up so frustrated. They know what they're doing. They see it, and they still can't seem to stop. And it's not because they're bad or failures. It's just because insight is only the very beginning of transformation. So let's take just a minute to look a little deeper at these 3 sort of levels where this pattern is happening. The first layer is your nervous system. When your nervous system feels threatened, everything becomes more threatening and more urgent, including the need for connection and the need for change, the need for safety, right? It's like your nervous system is like, I need safety now, right? And so you become more reactive and you look outside yourself to make things better, right? You get more focused on getting reassurance. You get more focused on getting your partner to be and do things differently. So for an example, if your husband forgets to text you back, if your nervous system is in protection mode, like so many of ours are chronically in our modern times, that forgotten text is going to feel like a much bigger problem, a much bigger threat than it is. And the urge to do something about it, to get him to text you, becomes strong. And from there, that next layer, the thought pattern or mind layer, also gets activated into a more fearful direction, which means we notice what's missing a lot more. Like sometimes even when nothing is missing at all, like affection or attention or care, we feel like it's missing. And then for many of us, our thoughts will then, of course, go into a more controlling direction. So this can end up looking like we're quick to notice when he's not loving us as obviously, or he doesn't hug us when we come home, or he comes home, for example. And then, like the young women I started out this podcast talking about, we might start thinking he needs to be more obviously loving to fix the feeling that we are missing. And so then we start telling him so, or trying to get him to be more obviously loving, right? So thoughts like he doesn't care, I shouldn't have to ask, he needs to XYZ, right? These kinds of thoughts can be happening from this place very easily, and they really fuel the controlling impulse. And then there's the third layer, which is your sense of worth. We could also call this your identity. And that's really intertwined with all of this. Because if your worth feels shaky, if you're not so solidly sure that you're just no matter what, a worthy, valuable human being, your relationship oftentimes will become responsible for proving that you are. that you are worthy, that you are valuable. So when we don't deeply know our worth, we naturally look to our partner to reassure us of it. And when he doesn't do that consistently enough, what oftentimes will happen is we'll start trying to get more of that proof from him. And I actually think this is one of the bigger things that happens with the younger generations, those young women I was talking about early on, because they're still really young and forming their deeper sense of worthiness and identity. But of course, it doesn't really matter your age. You can still absolutely not have a deep sense of self-worth. And as HSPs, this tends to be one of the bigger challenges that we confront in our lives, in our relationships, right? So when we don't have that deep felt sense of worth, we easily fall into the trap of looking to our significant other to provide our sense of worth for us. And when our partner isn't perfect at that, we oftentimes end up trying to control him so that we can feel all of that. So those are the three levels where this patterning tends to happen. And even if you know that you fall into this pattern of controlling and you want to stop, it can be quite hard to actually stop because it's happening at these deep internal layers of yourself. So it's not something you just say, oh, okay, I see that it's not helping to be this way or do these things, so I'll just quit doing it, right? It's not something you can just will yourself to stop doing. So what does allow those of us who have this tendency to fall into control to drop that pattern? The answer is shifting the pattern at these 3 levels, of course. So that looks like regulating your nervous system, not just in the stressful moments of life, but in general, so that you spend most of your time in the calm and connect state of your nervous system instead of the fight, flight, or freeze states. And then learning to steward your mind out of thought patterns that lead to controlling behaviors and into ones that let you feel truly safe and let your spouse be himself, and that allow you to feel secure and loved and connected anyway, even when your partner's just being who he is. And lastly, but super importantly, building a truly felt sense of worth inside of yourself from the inside out. And this is exactly why I created Foundations of Emotional Well-Being for HSPs. Because controlling patterns are signs that your nervous system and your mind and your sense of self-worth are carrying more burden than they're meant to carry. And that it's time to support them so that they truly feel safe without trying to control your partner's behavior. When you support these foundational layers in yourself, you naturally stop trying to control your partner as much. And you're not forcing yourself to stop. It's just that what happens is the need falls away as the safety builds in your own system, right? Because you no longer rely on your partner to create that safety and that reassurance and that all the feelings that you want and need, that you used to only be able to feel by getting him or relying on him to provide for you. But now you know how to cultivate them within yourself. So that's what happens when you know how to regulate your own system and steward your own mind and reconnect to your deep, innate sense of self-worth. That's when you become a woman who can honor your needs without trying to control another person into meeting them. And that's when love gets to feel like real love again for both of you, instead of a tiring, burdening, resentment-making job. And I know ultimately that's what you really want, for love to really feel like love, to feel nourishing and open and light and truly connecting and sweet. So I invite you to join me in Foundations of Emotional Well-Being. To learn more and get in, head over to the link in the show notes or head to hspmarriagecoaching.com and go to the Start Here Foundations of Emotional Well-Being button. This is the program that really changes everything at the very root, which is the only place to shift that actually leads to lasting change. All right, my friends, be oh so well.